Hey, Pete Winarski here from Win Enterprises LLC. And today we're going to talk about why it's absolutely critical if you are a small business to get your support infrastructure and systems and processes in place. And you really have to do it right now. Now, before we go there, just telling you we're going live here on our Facebook page, the Pete Winarski page. We're also at the group More Revenue, More Profit, and we're also on our YouTube channel. But what we really want to do is bring you into our More Revenue, More Profit Facebook group. That link, facebook.com/groups/more revenue, more profit. So if you're seeing this in some other place, go there because that's where we're loading up our content. We're listening to your questions and watching the dialogue. And that's where we will pile on and add value to the conversation to make sure that you, as a business leader, are driving the initiatives and the tasks and the things that you need to do to make sure that you're getting the results that you really need to get. So today's conversation is inspired by what we're seeing out there working with small businesses. For decades now, literally decades, we've worked in larger companies, either in roles where we own a responsibility, we own the P&L, or we own an operation, or whatever it is, right? Going back to all the way to the 80s, right? The 1980s. Remember those? Wish I could go back, especially right now today. But nonetheless, think of what a larger company has for systems and processes. I mean, my first job out of college, I landed in a company that was about 80 million in revenue when I got there. 2 years later, it was 100 million in revenue. And then 10 years after that, it had tripled or more. I think it was about 350 million at about the time when I left after 10 years, right? David, this is where David Tweet and I met. He came in a couple of years after me and then stayed a couple of years after. I think he was there 11 years or so. So our overlap was a lot of years. And of course, that's the Wire Mold Company. It's a very well-known story worldwide for the systems and processes, full system, full company around the concepts and principles of being a lean or a Toyota Production System type place. Now, that's just one benchmark. What we, of course, have was working as a consultant for lots of other businesses, into the billions, right? So we can take what we learned from the infrastructure that those billion-dollar size companies have, and then look at the situation for a small company. And what's really interesting, because now that we're really amping up our support of small businesses, we're seeing this all over the place. You have someone who they started the company by themselves. And, when you start it, you're kind of a one-person operation. And then maybe you start adding resources and maybe you start growing a little bit. And now the number of people that you can serve with your product or service goes up as you add, people get your name out there, people hear about you, your orders go up, the demand on your services go up, you add more resources. But have you really done it in a way that, enables you to really rocket your growth? So you're over that inertia hump and now you're starting to get some work and you've got enough work for multiple people. However, your systems and processes and infrastructure really aren't there and enabling you to profitably grow like crazy. And that's what we want to really talk about. So think about things like your organization structure, the resources you bring in. What should your team look like? How much should you be paying them? Should you add contractors or employees? Should you have an office? Should you have a physical location or should you be remote? Obviously, that answer has changed a lot in the last 6 months with what people have experienced with COVID. Then you've got things like your training procedures, your standard operating procedures to begin with, right? Making sure that all of those things are really defined and buttoned up. And how do you know if someone's doing the job that they should do? That idea of trust and then verify, right? Trust that they've learned it and then verify that with spot audits and checks to make sure that they are doing what you expected and things are working, right? What else? your financials, right? Got to get your financial statements in order. We've seen businesses in the neighborhood of 20 million in revenue who were our clients who are still running their financials like they're this little tiny family-owned operation, right? What's really interesting about the financial discussion is, from an accountant's standpoint, if you're a one-person company, of course, they want to help you save money on taxes, and there's certain tax strategies about what you include in your expenses that are legitimate. I'm not talking about non-legitimate, but legitimate business expenses, to make sure that your business expenses are truly reflecting what you do, and that there's a variety of things that you consider and think about to get your taxes basically as low as legally possible, right? That's an accountant's point of view. But meanwhile, if you want to grow up and you want to be a big company and you want to actually be millions and millions in revenue, and that could be tens and twenties and hundreds of millions in revenue, then of course what you have set up there is totally different than a solopreneur's, family-owned business type of an experience, right? It's like two ends of the spectrum. So, this example, $20 million company, family-owned, third generation now, and they were still somewhat operating like a small onesie twosie company. And of course they had 100 employees or so, right? So, a little bit of a disconnect there, because the types of things you want to have, yes, you want to manage your cost down, right? I mean, if you're a public company, you're trying to grow your profits like crazy, right? Because that's what you're being held accountable for. And meanwhile, if you're an individual or a small company, you're trying to get as much leverage out of your business while keeping your taxes in check, right? So there's this like yin and yang that goes on, and a lot of small businesses are confused about what that ought to look like. So obviously your other infrastructure, what are your reporting structures? What are your metrics in the first place? What's important to your vision and your mission and your purpose? Why are you here? Why did you start the company? Why is the business here? Who are you serving? And how do you know you're doing a good job at it, right? So what are those metrics? But then, of course, there's the financial metrics. There's the operating metrics. How well are we doing what we ought to be doing? How efficient are we, right? So there's a lot of big company professional management concepts that can come into play to really help a small business, right? So that's part of what happens when you layer in infrastructure. And then, eventually you get into, if you do build a team because you want to grow a company and you want to grow in the millions and tens of millions, and then maybe sell your business at a huge valuation, ta-da, you better have these things in place, because the first thing they're going to do is they're going to say, let's look at your books. If your books are just like, if they can poke holes in them all over the place, the conversation's over and you didn't get a check for $20 million, right? It's sorry. So you got to factor all of that in place. So with that in mind, you've got to get some of the basics in place. And just as your strategy has an immediate term, a medium term, and a long term, immediate might be like, how do I get revenue right now? What do I have to do to get some cash flowing or boost my cash flow up? Especially in today's economy. The economy's upside down. COVID's wrecking havoc. It's just the reality of today. People aren't going out and spending the way they were. If you're a restaurant, you're seeing that. Just use restaurants as an example for a moment. It's a very real microcosm of our economy right now. Because if you're a retail outlet, you're certainly not getting the foot traffic that you did before. Right? Especially like this time last year, I'm recording this early September. Labor Day just happened, the official end of summer, where people are all over the place. And think of all of the window shopping that happens on vacations and things. We didn't even do a legitimate vacation this year, right? It was a couple days at my sister's cottage, but it wasn't like we hopped on an airplane and went somewhere. We had one night overnight in a hotel earlier in the summer in July, for a one-day getaway for a Friday night and a Saturday. That's it, right? It wasn't like the year before we were in Alaska, we were in Seattle, we were in Vancouver, and man, there's restaurants every night and spending in the shops and et cetera, et cetera. So that ain't happening the way it was, right? It's just part of the current reality. So if you're the business owner, right, you're B2C and you've got consumers, you now have to think about things a little bit differently. So job one from your strategy is probably like, well, how do I get my cash flow up? Well, there's also infrastructure job one, right? There's the immediate infrastructure items to get in place. Then there's the medium term and the longer term. What goes in what bucket depends on a couple things. Where are you now? What are your goals for the long term? And then let's figure out how your operating strategy, right? So what do you want to do in the market? How do you want to serve your customers, et cetera? Your strategy fits with the infrastructure that you need for that strategy to be successful. So if you want to, in the next 3 to 5 years, grow your business, add a few extra million of revenue so that you can sell and put a few extra million in your pocket, then the strategy and the infrastructure required is going to be totally different than if you want to have a lifestyle business where you can work 15 to 20 hours a week and exercise all day long and see your kids and go off and goof around and play and just have a little bit of cash flowing. Totally different, right? So you have to decide which camp are you in and where do you want to play. So again, the infrastructure, you can't wait, especially around getting your operations to work. Because think about, here in Connecticut a few weeks ago, it was only probably a month ago now, when the hurricane came up the coast, kaboom, and it knocked the power out for around 5 days, depending on what part of the state you live in. Our neighborhood was locked down such that there were wires hanging and we couldn't get our car out of the neighborhood for 2 days, right? And some people managed to get their car out and they left it parked. David picked me up. I had to walk a half mile to the next neighborhood, through the trail, to then hop in his car. And then, of course, he dropped me off there at the end of the day, and it was a long walk back. In the morning, it was cool. In the afternoon, when he dropped me off at 5 or 6 o'clock, whatever it was hot outside, right? So, that's that can happen. And then you got this sort of thing happening all over the place. And if you're a service provider that deals with people's houses, for example, they're like, hey, no, you can't come over. I don't have power right now. So like people's schedules got all messed up. Your revenue may have took a blip. What if something personal happened, like somebody gets sick, right? And you're a one-person company. What if you get sick? There's another infrastructure item, your insurance processes and policies that you have in place. Do you have your life, your disability, and that sort of thing? If you have key people, do you have your key man insurance, your key person, et cetera? Like, oh, I'm freaking you out now, right? Because, these things do matter. Now, you've got to, again, scale it to your goals. What matters to you? What would happen if all of a sudden you couldn't work for 60 days? Is your business done? Or do you have everything in place and it's no big deal? And we have a lot of businesses where the primary owner or founder or CEO is so involved in their business that if they stopped being involved, everything kind of comes to a screeching halt, right? So getting the infrastructure in place where it can run without you is critically important. So take these themes from today, things around your organization, how you get your work done, who your team is, how do you know how to pay them, getting your financials in order, getting your things like your insurance project and your insurance products, your contracts. We didn't mention that, but you might have contracts with, if you have employees who are contractors, you don't want to just like be paying people loosely under the table. And then next thing you know, they claim, hey, I'm an employee and you stopped paying me. And so I get unemployment from you. And you're like, what? No, you don't. And they, goes through the court system and you're like, bing, bang, sorry, buddy, you didn't have a contract in place. So these are things that you have to think about proactively and right size your infrastructure to match your goals and your strategy to get there with the immediate term, the medium term, and the long term. Don't put it off to some point down the road in the future. Don't keep kicking the can down the street. You got to pick up the can and do something now to get this in place. Fun talking to you today. Let's catch up again in 2 days. We'll see you Friday, noontime Eastern. Take care.